My name is Lucy Zhang. I'm a 3L, one of the symposium editors with Sean. And I'm really excited to introduce the local producers panel. I'm sure all of you guys are going to be really excited to hear what they have to say as well. So first I want to introduce the moderator, Baylen Linnekin, who is the executive director of Keep Food Legal Foundation. Keep Food Legal is the first nationwide membership organization devoted to food freedom, which is the right of every American to grow, raise, produce, buy, sell, share, cook, eat, and drink the foods of their own choosing. KFL's mission is to promote goodwill, fellowship, and a sense of common purpose among those who grow, raise, cook, and sell food, and those who buy and eat it. And Linnekin's writing on food and law has appeared in numerous scholarly publications as well as the popular press. And in addition to his role as executive director, he's also an adjunct professor at the George Mason School of Law. Okay. Next, we have Ryan Butler, who is the CFO of Green Button Farm, which is a farm specializing in quality produce and pasture-raised poultry and beef using sustainable and responsible principles that result in a safe, chemical and antibiotic-free food and a healthy environment. And the farm is actually only 9 miles away from us here in Durham. So it's one of the most local farms that we have in Durham. Ryan attended Davidson College and earned a BS degree in agricultural business management with a concentration in agricultural economics from NC State. And over his 15-year working career, he's worked for the USDA, big chemical and international groceries, and worldwide financial institutions. And those experiences have provided firsthand knowledge of how our current agricultural system is broken and where we as a nation of peoples are starved for local, safe food. Portia McKnight is the co-owner of Chapel Hill Creamery, which I think is a place we all enjoy eating their cheese. It's a dairy farm specializing in making cheese from happy cows, and the farm is animal welfare approved, meaning that the meat and dairy products from the farm come from animals that are raised to the highest animal welfare and environmental standards. Chapel Hill Creamery focuses on low-stress environment and calm handling practices, such as moving the herd slowly to and from milking, plenty of green pastures for roaming, and a heated barn during the colder months, all of which contributes to their health and well-being. Tina Prevatte is co-CEO of First Hand Foods, a company that connects North Carolina's pasture-based livestock producers with local food lovers, restaurants, food service providers, and retailers. They source from a network of remarkable farmers who raise their animals humanely on pasture without antibiotics or animal byproducts or hormones. And as the co-CEO, she's responsible for the financial planning and the management, sales, marketing. She began her career with the EPA as an environmental engineer enforcing the Clean Air Act, and she's also she attended the dual degree program between UNC's Keenan Business School and the Department of City and Regional Planning, where she received an MBA and an MCRP. She also holds a bachelor's in women's studies from UC Santa Cruz and a BS in environmental engineering from UC Berkeley. Amy Tornquist is the chef owner of Durham's Watts Grocery and also Sage and Swift Gourmet Catering Company, where her menus are defined by what's grown locally and seasonally. And her dishes have been featured in Food and Wine, Country Home, and Elegant Bride. And when she was pursuing her bachelor's degree at UNC, she also worked as a chef in training at Cook's Corner in Chapel Hill under Bill Neal. She also attended La Varine École de Cuisine in Paris, where she studied classical French techniques. In Paris, she worked for a Michelin 2-star restaurant, was also a private chef at the British Embassy. And when she came back from France, she decided to start her own catering company, which is Sage and Swift. And she previously served as a president of SEEDS, which is a Southeast efforts developing sustainable spaces. And she helped develop the community harvest programs. Okay. Without further ado.
Thanks. Do I click forward or?
Yeah, I think this should work. No?
No, I think I got it. Okay, cool. Thanks. Appreciate it. Well, let me be the first, or not exactly, to thank Duke Law School and the forum also for hosting this panel, for having me here. Also, thanks to the other panelists, all of whom are doing fantastic work. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes about a book project I'm working on right now, and then we're going to shift over to a Q&A with about a dozen or so questions on a variety of local food producer issues, which I think should be a lively conversation, should be fun. And I guess I want to note that, up to this point, I think we've heard a lot about policies and laws and regulations, but I think this panel, to me, is more about sort of personal stories and how people in the food business can succeed with or despite regulations. So without further ado, here I'm talking about this book project of mine, which has a working title of Food Unchained, hence the name at the bottom there. And I'm going to talk to you about Mark DeNittis, who is a chef in the Boulder, Colorado area, who is famed there for his salumi, which is dried and cured meats, if I may oversimplify. Let's see, I think I can start. All right. There we go. All right. And I made the Prezi, as many of you have seen, you can make them different ways. I made it as sort of dizzying as possible, so it'll dance all around. So, if you have a bag in front of you, it might be a good idea. Anyway, so this is Mark DeNittis. A couple years ago with his wife. I've spoken to both of them on the phone. They're excellent people, and clearly very much in love. And this is Mark out in front of the business that he founded, Il Mondo Vecchio, which is a salumi. And you can see here he's very happy looking. He has the cool kind of goatee, shaved head look. And you can see also this is sort of a bit of foreshadowing. Unfortunately, you can see the USDA inspector's parking space there. That will unfortunately come into play later. Not the parking space, but the inspector. So here's Mark. He, for 10 years, was a culinary instructor at Johnson & Wales, which is one of the leading culinary instruction schools. They have locations around the country, Rhode Island, Florida, and Denver as well. And you can see here that those sort of faceless people in the background are learning from him how to butcher meat. That's one of the things that he did and does. He's an educator. And food safety was certainly one important element of the skills that he taught. This is you may be able to make out on his sleeve there, the Rocky Mountain Institute of Meat, which is a group that he founded to educate the public. And he's also worked for the American Lamb Board as a consultant. I mean, he's an expert in butchering meat and doing it safely. So when he decided to found Il Mondo Vecchio, which means the old world. He went to a local supplier, which is Cure Organic Farm, owned by a guy named Paul Cure, and which is pretty cool because he's curing meat and he's buying from a guy named Cure. But Cure itself, DeNittis, I think this was a conscious decision to buy from a responsible, sustainable supplier. Cure only sells within 50 miles of their farm. They have more than 100 different varieties of organic vegetables and the fruits and vegetables on the farm. And DeNittis' interest was, in particular, their heritage breed pigs that they raised and sold to him, which he would then turn into a variety of pepperoni, sausage, other salumi. So you can see here, these are the Cure meats which have arrived at the facility, the USDA-inspected facility that DeNittis owns, Il Mondo Vecchio. And here is the saying, obviously, is you never want to see sausage being made. Well, this is actually a rather attractive operation here. If you can make it out, I believe DeNittis actually wears a head kerchief, like a shower cap, but for food processing on his goatee. That's how rigorous his food safety standards are. And you can see the gentleman making the sausage behind. I should note again that USDA inspector was present at all times during food production. These are the horizontal and vertical drying racks where the sausages would be processed in a dedicated room for that purpose. And moving along, we can see these are, if not the finished products, then certainly about ready to eat. And despite the fact that I've been in, I've been in North Carolina for 25 hours now. I've eaten pork at all 4 meals I've had here, and still that looks good to me. I would eat that in a heartbeat. So then these are the finished products, some of those that Mark made. And I should mention also that I'm grateful to Mark for having provided me with all these photos for this presentation. So he was earned widespread acclaim. He was featured. That's him on the right with his partners in this is a Denver magazine. And I should let's see. He was the Colorado Restaurant Association's 2012 Exceptional Newcomer. He was Denver's hottest chef, or a finalist for that, according to Eater in 2012, and Bravo, which airs Top Chef, called him the Sausage King. So, to say that he was acclaimed, I think, is an understatement. And to say that he was, raising or producing sustainably raised and produced foods is also an understatement. His ingredient list, which I think I have here, this is a quote that he told me in 2012: sea salt, meat, quality spices, and thyme. That's the only things that went into his food, and that's thyme, T-I-M-E, not T-H-Y-M-E. So you can see here, too, the Denver Post featured, that's an Il Mondo Vecchio sausage being loaded. He was helping fuel a renaissance. He was supplying all the top restaurants in the city. And here's him winning another award. And you can see, you may have caught on by now, by my allusions earlier and the fact that I'm talking about this in the past tense, that things soured. So this is November 2nd, 2012. This is right after he won all of these awards. The USDA told him that they had always, he'd always passed all his tests with flying colors. He had in place, let's see, I have a list of his food safety. So in addition to having a USDA inspector on site at all times and also passing every single USDA inspection with flying colors, he had in place a HACCP plan, which is mandatory. He followed standard sanitation operation procedures, implemented a food safety quality assurance program, conducted regular food safety audits and facilities inspections, followed good manufacturing procedures, carried out regular food safety training, implemented an allergen control plan, and had all his labels pre-approved by the USDA. So he was pretty thorough. And he ran afoul of USDA regulators, not because he broke any rules, but because they decided to change their interpretation of the rules. And so he did not add nitrates or nitrites to his meat. And nitrates are often naturally occurring in vegetable matter and whatnot, and they're used by most producers. But because he was old school, he didn't want to, and for a time that was just fine with the USDA, and he was doing that. But they told him, they gave him two options. They said, you can keep making Il Mondo Vecchio sausages, but you just can't, you have to add nitrates and or nitrites, or you can shut down. And I think he's much more polite and positive than I would have been in that. And I would have, anyways, it's not what I would have done, but he politely said he would shut down, and he did. The other option was that he could do a challenge study, pay thousands of dollars, and prove that his food was safe, when, in fact, no one had ever been sickened by it. There had never been any unhealthy or dangerous bacteria found in the food. And let me be clear, had anyone been sickened by his food, or had there been any illnesses or pathogens found in his food, then I think the USDA's actions would have been reasonable. But in this case, his process was producing the outcomes that the USDA wanted, and then they just decided that the process was more important than the outcomes. So anyways, this is Mark is unfortunately the star of the introduction of my book, and I think he illustrates a point. The book looks at ways that regulations either impede sustainable producers, something that Representative Pingree talked about, or promote unsustainable practices. For example, the Farm Bill, which I guess Representative Pingree also touched on, but farm subsidies, for example, I think are a good example of that. Or in the third case, examples where people want to raise their own produce in their yard, or and I'll get into this in the Q&A. In this area, people have been threatened with arrest for sharing food with the homeless in recent years. These sorts of practices are despicable, and they do result in real loss of businesses and of livelihoods and of sustainable ones at that. So I guess moving into the Q&A, I think that we'll, maybe I've started with a downer and it'll be more upbeat. But I think it's an important story that needs to be told, and Mark is a fantastic guy, and he's back on his feet, and perhaps his sausages will be sold again in the Denver area and hopefully elsewhere soon. But it's a cautionary tale about regulations and regulators, I think, run amok. So thank you. All right, so I'm going to throw out some questions which I shared with you all by email and which we talked about. I even added some last night during a fantastic dinner. Thank you very much, Amy. And so I'm just going to start with, feel free to answer in any particular order you'd like, but why did you get into the food business?
You want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead, Anne.
All right. I got into the food business because when I was in college, during the day, I did a kind of magazine internship one summer, and I worked at a restaurant at night, and I so loathed the stuff I did during the day. And restaurants are filled with incredibly smart people, really fun, interesting, generally super interesting people, and it was a fascinating place to work. And the magazine was not my cup of tea. And so I ended up just doing that. And I went to cooking school, and I came back, and I've drifted into, mostly fallen into a whole of different series of opportunities, starting with my catering business. So I just, I am a restaurant person. There are some of us. You are just a restaurant person. I enjoy the camaraderie of the people I work with in the restaurant. I enjoy the not very PC conversations we have in the restaurant. There are lots of things where you go, another conversation that could not be had in a business setting. Like, you're like, wow, only in a restaurant, which is fine, and I really enjoy that. Lots of people don't, but it can be an awkward transition for me in Carline, but for my own self. But in general, it's the life I chose.
Go ahead, Tina.
I think that I have a business partner, and we came into this business for different reasons, but for reasons that align to a shared mission. I think she came at it from the world. She had worked in the nonprofit world her whole career, more along the lines of focusing on environmental stewardship and how to help farmers take on more sustainable practices and providing technical assistance. And so had spent her career sort of building capacity and changing the way that farming is done. I was coming at this more from, I grew up in rural North Carolina. I was studying economic development and business at UNC, and seeing that when people talked about economic development in this state, most of the time they were, without saying so, just talking about the Triangle or Charlotte or the Triad. The rural counties in this state were being completely left out of the conversation. And that irked me. I'm from those places, and I see that those communities need economic development way more than the Triangle does. So when I met Jennifer and she was piecing together this idea of a middle business that's connecting farmers to markets, I was hooked on that idea because using business as a tool to generate rural economic development is a powerful idea to me, and I wanted to make that happen. And so that's what drew me to the food business.
Anyone else want to have at it?
So we moved from, when we were expecting our second child, we moved from downtown Baltimore to Bahama. I don't know if you guys know where Bahama is.
I've been to Bahama.
Yeah, it's not.
Don't blink.
It's not downtown Baltimore. But we wanted to, and so we moved to this farm, and we wanted to start growing food for our kids, baby food at the time, produce and some eggs. And so our farm started with a quarter-acre garden and 6 chickens. And I was a second generation off farm, So my grandparents were on farm, and I wanted nothing to do with it. But I found out when I started growing food for our family and we started spending family time, I really enjoyed it, and I felt at home again. And right about the same time, so I have an off-farm job. I work at a wealth management firm, and right about the same time we started doing that, 08 and 09 happened, and my days were just terrible. I mean, I would wake up at 4 and look at the futures and just know that I was going to be in for a bad day. And so when I got home, there was quiet in the garden, and I started doing more and more, and we started getting more animals. And then I started giving it to friends and family, and I started taking it into clients. And we did that for a while, and they said, "You're really good at this. And this is really good. We'll start paying you for this if you do it." And it just kind of snowballed after that. So we both lived dual lives, off farm and on farm. But it's really growing the food, and then once we started learning about food, becoming passionate about it, and working with people like Amy to give them the best they could put on the plate, and that became really cool for us.
Well, let me start out by saying how glad I am to be here. I lived in Durham for about 16 or 17 years ago. That was a while back. And so this afternoon when I was trying to come here, I was driving up and down Irwin Road looking for Science Drive, and I was lost in Durham, which I sort of consider my hometown. And I finally did get here. Come to find out, Science Drive did used to come off Irwin Road. I was right. It was Science Drive that was wrong, not me. So, again, I'm really happy to be here today. And I'm also happy to be in the food business because I've always been in the food business, and food has been incredibly important to me ever since I was growing up, and my mother cooked 3 meals a day for the whole family until right now, being on a farm and milking cows and making cheese, which I did not grow up doing.
Cool. So I'm going to skip ahead a question or two. I don't know if you had all sort of memorized your answers in order.
What do you think?
We'll see. So are your businesses sustainable, and can you sort of tell the audience what sustainability as pertains to your business and food means?
I'll go first because mine is definitely the least sustainable in of the three. Because
There's 4.
well, y'all are all sustainable and I'm not. So I am more sustainable than most restaurants. I am conscious of the decisions I make, and I'm conscious of who I purchase from. But I do find that it's very hard to be perfect. And I don't believe that my customers want to pay for me to be perfect or are willing to. And so I choose to straddle a little bit. I am most consistent in produce, dairy, and fish. I am least consistent in meat, although we work very hard to work at it and to get there. But it is hard. And I do find it very difficult and a super challenge for me all the time. And I think it's I buy some grocery products. I buy a lot of local. I work on making sure that, my dairy and my eggs and all that stuff is local. But those are sort of low-hanging fruit. I think for me, the challenge is to work on the stuff that's really hard and to try and kind of bring my customers along with me. But it is a challenge. I don't want to be a really expensive restaurant. I really don't. And so I have a challenge. I find it much easier to make that choice with fish because I have one fish person mostly I work with, and so it's like I can control the universe that way. And I work with one guy, and so it's super sustainable. But the other stuff is much more complex for me and really hard. So,
and I guess I'd like to pose a question following up your question is, what is sustainable? Because sustainable means so many different things to so many different people. And one of our biggest struggles as a dairy farm and a business that makes cheese, it's energy. And right before I was here today, we had a group of 6 people out from NC State, my technical guy, trying to figure out, okay, how can we be more sustainable with our energy use? Because any dairy farm is going to use a tremendous amount of hot water and a tremendous amount of electricity, and how can you possibly minimize that? So that, for us, is one of our biggest challenges for sustainability. And I'll stop there.
Energy, I echo that. I mean, even on our farm, being a primary protein farm, energy to run the coolers and the walk-in freezers is probably the least sustainable thing. We are sustainable in a sense in that most of our clients are within 20 miles of us. Most of them are within 10 miles. Transportation, we process or harvest animals within 60 miles. That's pretty good in the local food movement. I mean, that I have colleagues that drive, 4 hours each way to do the same thing. That's sustainable. We're putting our land in conservation easements, so there'll be no development over the next, 100 years, or when one of my kids decides they got wronged and hires an attorney to bust the. So you guys could do that. So that I feel good about that. Bringing in feed inputs, as was brought up in the previous panel, is not the most sustainable thing to do, and bringing in nutrients onto our farm. Although our stocking density is such that we can do it and feel okay about it. And then the water quality or best management practices we put in are pretty sustainable and cutting edge. So, yeah, those are some sustainable things with the bat.
I think I look at our sustainability in 2 kind of buckets. One is like our internal day-to-day operations, and then there's the supply chain and our the claims and standards that we have on our product. I mean, in terms of our day-to-day operations, I'm like I hate waste. I hate wasting things. I hate excess packaging. And I often say, I don't know if I could be in any other business after this one, because we don't have, there's none of that. The meat comes in the package, it's sold in the package. That's the most minimal packaging you could have on that product. It's a product that is consumed. It's, if there's no food waste on the end of that supply chain, there's no trash that we're creating out in the world. So in that way, it's an ideal business to be in terms of a lot of sustainability metrics. Our claims, we are producing, we're not producing, but we're aggregating and marketing. All of our products are antibiotic-free. No added hormones, pasture raised. We don't use the term grass-fed because we do allow some supplementation by our beef producers. And so we've developed what we think are regionally appropriate production standards for beef. We worked with some meat scientists at NC State to develop a set of protocols for how you should be raising beef on pasture humanely here in North Carolina. And for pork, we use animal welfare approved standards. So we choose and adhere to standards that sort of set the bar around what sustainability means for us. But I do find that that term is a very loose term. It's a bucket of terms, falls into that when you are talking about food. And once you start to make certain claims, people assume a lot of other claims come with that. So if you say, we sell local pasture-raised meats, they'll be like, it's organic. And no, it's not organic. And for me to explain to you why it's not is just not a terribly quick thing. So it's a lot of what we're doing all the time is sort of teasing apart these different terms and claims and what they mean and but the consumer is just thinking, oh, it's sustainable. It's when they sort of collapse that with organic. But when it comes to meat, it's way more complex than just organic.
I guess if I had to give like a quick and dirty sort of definition, it would be one, that you're making money, because that's certainly a key part of sustainability, and two, that you're minimizing any negative impacts on the environment and other actors, I guess, in your area. What about sourcing? When you're sourcing, how do you sort of know who you trust and perhaps who you don't trust, and how do you identify people for sourcing whatever it is you feed or food, or whether you're feeding animals or humans?
I think it's important to have a lot of conversations with the people you're buying stuff from, and this should be for consumers as well as for me in the restaurant. Having someone that can say, oh, well, yeah, that Chestnut's going to go out and he's going to get your fish and it'll be there Tuesday. Okay, great. And so it's kind of important to have as many people that you can trust within that conversation as possible. So even when I work with my grocery purveyor, I'm like, well, I'm not going to have this kind of meat or that kind of meat, or I don't want it like that, and I don't want it like that. And we've been working with each other for 15 years, so we have a shorthand. So I know that he's not going to do something that I'm not down with, and he knows where I'm coming from. We try to work with smaller people as much as possible, but I also see within our current setup, there are like my large produce purveyor, for example, is now doing a lot of North Carolina produce and a lot of small-ish, it's more mid-sized farms, so that even when I'm looking for a hothouse cucumber, it's a hothouse cucumber from around here. So the guy who runs the thing is from Hertford.
Oh, wow.
Which is in eastern North Carolina, for those of you not from here, nearby the county where he's from and my family's from. So there is movement even within my larger kind of systems to sort of say, oh yeah, you have this North Carolina stuff and that North Carolina stuff, and you bring in this flour that's from my guy that I can get flour from, but you have to talk about it. I mean, it's a process.
Yeah, as the relationships are important, and so when we're bringing new producers into our network, we go visit their farm, we learn about why they got into farming, why they are interested in working with us, of course, they have to meet our production standards, but it's, there's certain kinds and sizes of farms that make a good fit for us, and we've kind of figured out what that is over time. So there's a fit culturally, there's a fit economically, and then just can we communicate with these people in a productive, professional way on a week-to-week basis? That's when we're choosing our farmers, and that's when we're choosing what processors we work with. That was one of the biggest determining factors of what slaughterhouses we work with is, can we have a productive conversation with these folks each week that gets us what we want on the time frame that we want? That's one of the challenges of the local meat supply chain, is that's not as easy to come by as you'd think. So that the communication and the relationships and having those be sort of mutually respectful, open communication is key for us.
Can you follow? I had a follow-up question on slaughter. Where do you have to send your animals for slaughter? How far? And I've heard stories of people getting back odd numbers of hooves or ears and things like that.
Well, we could be all day on those funny stories.
We work with Acre Station Meat Farm. They're in eastern North Carolina. Our hog producers are concentrated in eastern North Carolina, so it's not that great a distance for them to get to the processor. And they do a great job for us. We I think, being a regular presence in their facility helps. So even if you're a small-scale producer, if you're there with certain frequency and your request of them is fairly consistent, they'll do a great job. When you start to throw some new cuts or some new products, that's when it can become challenging, and you've got to increase your communication with these folks. But I think we're relatively fortunate in sort of, you look at the national picture of small-scale slaughterhouse infrastructure, we're doing pretty good in North Carolina. We've worked historically with just one beef processor, Chaudhry Talal Meats in Siler City, and that choice was made because they did a great job. There are other people who do a great job, but we were having the best rapport with them in terms of like getting on the schedule, them doing what they said they were going to do, getting us what they said, and because of our claims, one of our core values is traceability. So we need to know that this beef from this farmer is coming to us and it's packaged and labeled correctly, and they get that right. We've had very few instances of them. We've had no instances of them like mixing up our beef with other people's beef, but we've had instances of like the wrong animal number on it's our beef, but wrong. So little things happen, but we recently started working with a third processor, Piedmont Custom Meats, which is kind of near Burlington. So I think it's fairly remarkable that we have 3 choices of processors that we're able to do business with in terms of what other people in other parts of the country would tell you. But it is one of the most challenging pieces of our supply chain is we don't get to control the quality of our product. These processors control the quality of our product. And so we end up being a huge liaison between people like Amy. What chefs want and what these guys know how to do isn't always aligned. So we do a lot of educating and trial and error with how do you cut a ribeye the way a chef wants to see it on the plate.
Cool. Shifting gears slightly, how do you work to minimize or eliminate food waste, which is a big, 40% of all food goes to waste?
Well, I'll speak to that one. We have pigs. So part of our practice of sustainability is when you have milk and you make cheese, you get curds and whey. And whey is a waste product that can cause environmental damage if you just dump it on the ground or in the waters or whatever. But it makes pretty good feed for pigs, not just whey, but for sure they can drink whey instead of water. And so that's our major waste product, and we actually turn it into a resource. So the more you can do things like that, the better, and people are figuring these sorts of things out all over the country, I think. If we've got a cheese that drops on the floor, our floor's pretty clean, so sometimes I'll eat it, but it can also go to the pigs. And so occasionally we have product that goes to the soup kitchen, but as far as having to go to the last resource site, the compost pile, we try and save that for the poop.
We have had intermittently both employees and neighborhood people who wish to take our peelings for their animals. The health department does not particularly wish us to consolidate the peelings, right? Except in a closed vessel, right? So if they can come at a certain time and they can take it away with them, then it's all good. Otherwise, we have peelings that just have to go in the trash. I mean, the health department is not trying to have us have we have no space also. If you've ever peered into the kitchen at Watts, you can tell that I paid for the kitchen because it is tiny. It is so tiny and compact. Everything has its space, and we don't have much space for anything else. I would be really interested in a really consistent kind of food waste company that would take stuff away, but I have yet to see a truly kind of good, consistent one that would then put it to good use.
Either of you want to comment on the food waste question?
We have a working relationship with a local church that's 6 miles away from the farm, and the panel before us mentioned that. But I the first time I saw the line on a Wednesday night for that food shuttle or food pantry, or I don't know what they call it. It blew my mind. So since that night, any produce that we have that doesn't go out in our CSA on Monday, Tuesday, that Tuesday afternoon it goes to the food pantry. Busted seals, if we get those from the processor, those are when like pork chops become unvacuumed, and they don't particularly sell very well at market. Either the farmer eats those, or you take them to the soup kitchen. Products that we aren't able to sell as readily as other products, like pig's feet and all sorts of different things, make it to the soup kitchen, and then we grow about 15% extra on purpose on proteins and vegetables to take over there now since I saw the need in the community. So,
I guess I alluded to this during my presentation, and I think a couple of you just brought it up. Durham, a year and a half ago or so, was threatening to arrest people who were sharing food with the homeless and less fortunate. I don't know the outcome of that, but do you know the outcome of that? And what do you think about that in terms of, I mean, it's a great way both to aid people in need and to eliminate food waste, and there are probably 10 other benefits that we could talk about. What do you all think about the idea that people would be prevented from sharing food with those in need?
I think it's pretty terrible, but I have some of the same issues. Because we run a catering business too, which is filled with waste, right? There's always leftovers. And we try to take them to the shelter, and sometimes we can take them and sometimes we can't. Like sometimes we have to make sure that it's, been chilled all the time, super, like if it were in a restaurant. Like it has to be as if it were in, and so if it's not, then I'm sort of stuck. Even though I know it's good, I'm eating it myself, right? I'm having it for lunch. I know it's delicious, but I can't because I know the steps, and if I'm missing a step, I can't take it, which feels sad for me because there's much of it, and I wish it to be put to use.
If only there were a law school in the area that had clinical students who might tackle this issue. So this kind of riffs on a question I wanted to ask, which it wasn't one that I posed to you in an email, but I'm going to ask anyways. I got an email from an LA TV station. They want to interview me on Monday, and I don't know how to answer, so I'm hoping that you all can answer for me. People in California, I guess, have been selling food on Facebook, which is not the newest of trend. There was a guy named Dr. Claw in Brooklyn who was doing something similar earlier, and there was an underground grilled cheese sandwich guy in Brooklyn, or in Manhattan, who he and Dr. Claw hated each other because there was this rivalry between the lobster rolls and the grilled cheese. Anyways, so what do you think about this trend of people selling food on Facebook? I mean, it's, one woman who was interviewed by the TV station was selling tamales, and she said that, this allowed her to stay home with her kids, and this was the exact same food that she was serving her kids. But if she could sell it, then why not? So what do you all think about that?
I mean, ostensibly, I should not like it, right? Because I have to put the brick and mortar in, right? And I have to pay the taxes and stuff. But I kind of love it. I mean, just to be frank with you, I'd buy a tamale on Facebook. If it weren't going to kill me, I'd be all for it. So, I mean, on a certain level, I think, those folks are the people that make innovation and they take risks, and they're really not going to hurt any, I would want to make sure that someone I knew had already had one before I had one, right? But after that, I'd be all for it.
The king's taster.
Exactly. Just for safety's sake.
I find myself the same way. I'm kind of two minds about it. As a consumer, I might be open to it and be like, yeah, bring me some of those tamales. But as a business person and the MBA-minded person, I'm a little bit like, well, there's a way to do things, and there's a way not to do things. So if you're going to build a business, or try to build a business around a thing that you know is illegal, or then it's I don't know, it's just not a smart thing to do, is the way I find. It's like, do things by the book, and you can be successful and build a viable model that's sustainable financially and otherwise. I don't know, I can be intolerant of like those trying to get around or skirt systems that are in place.
There are a couple of things in our area that actually make it so that people could almost be legal. Because we have the cookery, which is a sort of by the hour kind of kitchen space, but it's super spendy, so that's less helpful. But then there's the new community kitchen opening up in Chapel Hill, run by a food person, and she has a community mission, not so much profit mission. So she would be having it less expensive space for you to make things in a legal way that then you could sell, and you could say you have a place that's approved and been inspected, and so then you're not breaking the law. So,
but I have to question, I mean, if it's okay to sell food via Facebook, that means it's okay to sell unregulated food, and I really don't think so. I've seen some ugly things. Even regulated, maybe it's not so great, but if it's unregulated, there's a much greater chance that it might be really not okay to eat. I mean, maybe you would eat it if you were starving, but we expect a certain standard of sanitation, and I think there's a place for regulation. I think it's totally appropriate that food preparation be regulated. So I would have to say, But I think Facebook's weird anyway.
All right, so we have two probablys, one on you may be, I guess, the tie maker.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'll go with Amy. When it comes to food regulation and all those things, I mean, no one in Amy's business, and my business, and all of our businesses, no one cares more about the health and welfare of our client and customer than we do, because that means we're going to go out of business. But I don't know if the people that are marketing tamales on Facebook or burritos on Facebook or anything on Facebook without a brick and mortar really cares that much. But then there's a part of me that's like, it's their business idea and let them run a business. And if it goes bad, then, kind of like a free market view of it. So
My friend once tried to sell kimchi on Craigslist. This was about 10
that's
years
one
ago.
I would say no to. Like, everybody should say no to kimchi on Craigslist.
Actually, it turned out that everyone did say no.
Okay, good. I was like, oh my God, please say no. Dangerous. Wow, bad idea.
So we'll close with one more food safety question, and then we'll turn it over to questions from the audience. Raw milk sales in North Carolina are illegal when sold for human consumption, although my understanding is they're legal when they're sold for non-human consumption, so pets and well, maybe just pets. I don't know. If you have a lion in your backyard, buy raw milk. So how do you all feel about that? And would you support a change, or do you think it's the right level of strictness?
Boy, I'd sure like to talk about that. One thing I'd like to, when I was thinking about this whole talk, the one thing I wanted to state, and I haven't gotten a chance to state it yet, is that people want to look at things in black and white. And the older I get, the grayer everything gets. Things are not black and white. Raw milk is not black and white. You can have, and it's not small farms and big farms either. And it's not grass-fed farms and grain-fed farms. It's just plain gray. So you want to buy raw milk for human consumption? Somebody might say, well, go to the farm and look and see if it's clean. You don't know what to look for. You don't. You don't know whether the cows have mastitis. You won't be able to tell. You don't know what the plate count is on that milk. You won't know how quickly it got chilled down. It's really not very safe to do unless it's regulated. So regulate it. That's my answer. I mean, most milk, you wouldn't want to drink it raw because the farms are too big. There's too much possibility of contamination. Now, I've been to some big farms that have awfully clean milk. Milking 500 cows, and you look at the filter, and it is spotless. Would I drink that milk? Yeah, I probably would. But there might still be a cow that has listeriosis, and you don't know it. So it is totally gray. That's my answer.
So I really like raw milk cheese. And I don't like it to always be old in order to be able to, because it has to be aged a certain amount if it's made with raw milk in this country. And there's some really good raw milk cheeses that aren't quite that old. But I'm not going to drink a glass of it unless Portia tells me I could, because I trust her.
Well, yeah, we drink our raw milk at home,
Right.
and we monitor it really
Right.
closely, and we look at the filters, and we know what the situation is with the cows, yes. And just so everybody knows, right now, the law is that cheese has to be 60 days old to be legally sold as raw milk cheese. But it is way more complicated than that. What kind of cheese? What's the pH of the cheese? How quickly did the acid form? What's the moisture level of the cheese right now? And the FDA has come to realize that it's way more complicated, and so there's some more laws coming down, and probably none of us are going to like them very much, but I'm sure hard cheeses probably we'll still be able to make with raw milk. But the soft cheeses can be kind of scary.
And Facebook sales of raw milk.
They're so delicious. Really, they really are. The most delicious, in fact.
I would tend to agree. Why don't we open it up to the audience for some questions? Yes.
Open for all of you, and I feel like in the last session we were talking a lot about the issue of scale and scaling up, and I was just wondering sort of like what you see as your capacity to potentially, scale up and both in terms of, the producers you work with and the markets that you sell to.
So we started out, if I can remember these historic numbers, we were buying 2 cows a week and like 4 hogs or something like that. We've basically quadrupled that over 4 years, so we're around 15 hogs, 7 beef, something like that. So we've sort of steadily scaled. There's some supply constraints to doing that, particularly with beef. We've scaled the number of producers we source from. We went from 12 to 60. We scaled the number of customers we have. We're approaching 90 customers. We started with maybe a dozen. So it's all moved up together over 4 years. I think the number one, well, there's a couple constraints to that. I mean, that's all been here in the triangle. We keep thinking, we got to get out of the triangle. We're starting to saturate our niche here. And then we realize that's completely not true as 10 new restaurants open up in Durham. And so we like to scale beyond the triangle. We have the distribution capacity to do that. We can scale with our pork production and do that. Beef is its own situation. It's sort of national issue of lack of beef right now in this country. And we actually are doing fairly well considering where some of our competitors are at. Not competitors, but some colleagues in other parts of the country have basically had to close down their niche beef businesses because of what's going on in commodity markets and how that affects what farmers decide to do with their beef. So I don't know if that starts to answer your question. We've scaled pretty dramatically in 4 years. We hope to continue to do that. And the other constraint is processing capacity. We had to go from 1 beef processor to working with 2 because we started to basically fill up the schedule. I mean, the schedule of the processor that we're working with. He said, we cannot do that much beef in one day for you. And so we just had to say, okay, then you can't get creative here on your scheduling, we got to go somewhere else. So we do run into that capacity of the processor issue. And so I think we'll have to continue to work with more and more processors as we grow.
I have a question specifically for Ryan. I think there's a lot of people in this room who are sort of headed in temporarily or long-term more of a corporate like day job direction, and it's really exciting to hear someone who's been able to straddle the two worlds. Do you think there's room in that market like throughout the country? Do you think that's niche to Durham, or do you think that, or this area, and do you think that it was something you were like specifically able to do because of your background?
I wouldn't recommend it. I'm a tough guy to be married to. And I have a unique set of skills just because of how I grew up and then the things I've done professionally. But I think there is a huge vacuum right now of professionals in our industry. And that means people outside that people on this panel deal with on a daily basis. Like processors. Their businesses are 60 or 70 years old, and they don't run them like businesses. And Tina and I beat our heads against a wall sometimes to get them to do things to make more money and be more sustainable. But I do think if I could go back, I would try to parlay my love for food and passion for food into my job that I did during normal people working hours. But the problem with that is I didn't discover that passion until I was, 30 plus. And that's going to be the case for a lot of people is you find what you truly love. One day will I farm full time? I don't know. I've been running it as a business and up until 200 years ago, all professionals and politicians, they all had agronomic or agricultural interests, and it's just been kind of recent in the last 50 years that being a professional and being part of a food culture has been mutually exclusive. So I like the idea of actually having the farm business and continuing my professional business. And recently I've married the two into sustainable and socially responsible investing. So now my night job and my day job go hand in hand. And that makes me happy with myself and a lot better person. So it's a long answer to your question.
Can I make 2 points sort of speaking to who the audience is here? I got an interesting call from an attorney this week. Just out of the blue, this guy calls me and says he's suing some CAFOs in the state, and he wants to talk to me about sustainable pork production and how that looks as an alternative. And he was actually interested in basically having some of our farmers speak in trial about their production practices and how they're so much better than CAFOs. And first, I had to say, I'm not putting my farmers in that position. I wouldn't. These pasture-based pork producers are producing pork right next door, literally next door to the CAFO. The people that you're suing are probably their neighbors, and they live in fear sometimes of the conflict that can happen out there. And so, no. And but that conversation just had me want to say to you all, a room of future attorneys, is educate yourself about food, because this guy knew nothing about pork production, and he was orchestrating a trial against one of the biggest pork producers in the state, and was calling me saying, so how is pasture-based pork production better? Are there any sort of middle ground production systems, and what do you do with your waste, and what do your farmers do with their waste? And it kind of blew my mind, like, you're relying on this conversation to make your case, and I just, he could do a much better job if he took the time to really understand pork production, and then the other thing that sort of struck me in preparing for this was there's food policy and regulation and the power of that to change the world, but there's also the power of consumers. And I think the power of consumers is more powerful than those tools in in terms of driving markets in certain directions. And I think university campuses are a really big example of that, especially for our business. One of our biggest customers is UNC Chapel Hill, and that is the case solely because there are a group of students on that campus who are very vocal about the kinds of food that they want served in their dining hall. They're very active and engaged with Carolina Dining Services, and they have Carolina Dining Services has committed to the Real Food Challenge. So UNC is serving thousands of pounds of pasture-raised pork to their students every week because the students are holding them accountable and making sure that they're doing that. Duke was a customer of ours, and overnight there were some changes in terms of the leadership in Duke Dining, and they had a slew of local producers that they were sourcing from, at least half a dozen that I know of, and overnight just made phone calls and said, sorry, we're not ordering from you anymore. And those producers, they plan on a weekly size of, Duke was probably the biggest customer for most of those producers, and overnight that customer is gone. So, and nothing's changed. Like they're no longer sourcing from those folks. I don't know what's happening on this campus in terms of local food, but you all, the students here, are the ones who have the power to change that and to hold your leadership accountable. And the purchasing power of universities in this area is tremendous. And if those commitments are there and students are holding them accountable, it makes a huge difference for huge numbers of farmers all over this state. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Do we have time for one more? We got to wrap it up. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone on the panel and everyone in the audience, and we're looking forward to the next speaker. I expected you to rip off your shirt to reveal like a Michael Jordan number 23 North Carolina shirt or something.
That's yours.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Thank you all.
We finally had Scott. We're running a little behind.
Yeah.
We finally got what he's interested in doing.
Yeah, well, I don't think Scott's the horse's mouth.
I parked, no, I parked on the side.
Get you a bottle of water. Just I think we're going to move into our next session since we're running a little behind. So if people could take their seats, please. Okay. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kelly Brownell. Kelly Brownell is the Dean of the Sanford School of Public Policy here at Duke, across the street. And yeah, right there. And he's also a professor of public policy. He serves on the board of directors at the Duke Global Health Institute. In 2006, Time magazine listed Brownell among the world's 100 most influential people in its special Time 100 issue, featuring those whose power, talent, or moral example is transforming the world. Dean Kelly has published 15 books and more than 350 scientific articles and chapters. He has served as president of several national organizations, including the Society of Behavioral Medicine, Association for the Advancement of Behavioral Therapy, and the Division of Health Psychology of the American Psychological Association.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's delightful to be here, and I have to like my commute right across the street from Sanford over to see my colleagues in the law school. You know, I've been at a lot of conferences where somebody was assigned at the end of the day to be the discussant, and I thought, oh my God. I've always hated that and hated to sit through it, so I'm going to make this very quick. But I did want to make several observations. One is, I think, I'm very grateful to the law school and for the folks who organize this conference for their efforts. The fact that this conference exists at all is a sign of changing times. It's a sign that many more disciplines are now interested in the issue of food than used to be the case. And the fact that the discipline of law and the profession of law has become interested in food issues, I think is an incredibly important advance and stands to help those of us who care about food issues in a great many ways. Dan Vermeer, when he was asking members of his panel, where would you start, I stopped to think about that myself. Because there's so many things one could do in this vast array of issues that are that pertain to food systems. Asking where you start is actually a very interesting question and not an easy one to answer. But I thought if I had to answer that, what I would say is we need to start with communications. That is, there's a world of people out there who need to understand the importance of food systems in their day-to-day lives and in the future prosperity of the world. The public, of course, needs to be persuaded because they have to support policies that will ultimately lead to major changes in the way we address food systems. So getting people to care, I think, is very important. But we also have to get our policymakers to care about these things as well. The Congresswoman's talk today is another good sign that somebody with her background and interest would get elected to Congress is a sign of changing times, but there are too few such people. And especially with the recent turnover in Congress, the likelihood of making good progress in these areas, at least in the near term at the national level, it doesn't look very positive. But we need to get our policymakers engaged and care about these issues. How can we do that? Well, one of the ways potentially is to convince these folks that food policy is a lot of other policies as well. Certainly food policy is health policy. That's an obvious one. It's education policy. How well children do in schools depends partly on how they're fed. It's environmental policy. Most everybody would recognize that as well. But it's also foreign policy. The State Department cares deeply about political stability between countries in the world where food trade issues are of major importance. The State Department is very concerned about dwindling water supplies in many parts of the world. Most of that water gets used for agriculture. And how long will it be between two countries who were reasonable neighbors in the past no longer will be because they share a water resource and one country doesn't have it any longer? It's also national security policy. Many of you may know that the Department of Homeland Security has issued a report not that long ago on the concern of bioterrorism occurring through the food supply. So if people can begin to appreciate the tentacles, if you will, of food policy into all these other areas of life that most everybody cares about in one way or another, I think we'll have a lot more allies to work on this and a lot more support for the public policies that ultimately will be able to change things in a broad scale way. I think also one communications effort that needs to be made is to bring together people who care about food policy issues for different reasons. This got mentioned today, but some people care about animal rights, some people care about biodiversity, others care about the public health aspects of food. There's a list of about 15 of these reasons that people care about food, but most of these people aren't working together in any concerted way. And if they came together if the American Public Health Association decided that, well, we can work with the Sierra Club and the World Wildlife Fund and groups like that because we have a common set of core interests that we can push forward in national policy and local policy too, I think we could accomplish a lot more. But there's a lot of splintering going on, a lot of groups working on their own issues without realizing that there's a kindred spirit that could be developed if groups could work together. And the political presence of all these groups working on a common set of issues could be considerable if people were able to work together. One of the issues that I was surprised I didn't hear mentioned today, or at least if it got mentioned, I was out of the room, was the potential of litigation in this space. I know in the public health areas like tobacco control, litigation has been an enormously powerful presence. And I'm wondering why this hasn't been brought into the food area more. There are allies potentially like the state attorneys general who could be a powerful force here if we choose to use them. Of course, the topics would have to be right. The legal theory would have to line up. But I think there are some very interesting potential victories to be had there. So I'll give you one example from my own experience. I moved here from Connecticut a year and a half ago, and I ran a food policy center at my previous institution. And we were very interested in the issue of food marketing and food labeling practices by the food industry. And I wrote a letter to our state attorney general, Dick Blumenthal, who is now in the Senate, but at that time was AG. And had said I had admired the work he had done on tobacco control. He'd been attorney general for many years. And would he be interested in working on food-related issues? And I got a call from his office just several days later saying he's very interested in this. He'd like to come meet with you. And so we met. And we decided that if the right issue came up, we would try to work on something. And then what seemed to me to be the right issue came along, and it was something called Smart Choices. Smart Choices was an industry food labeling program by which the industry more or less got together with itself and decided on nutrition criteria. And then any food that surpassed what were very lax standards that they said in a self-serving way could be granted this Smart Choice label, this big green label with a check mark that would go on the front of food packages. I think that's a sign, no question about it. There we go. So that's a sign to make the story short. So Smart Choices got launched in 2009 by the industry, but given the weak and self-serving criteria that the industry had established for itself, things like Fruit Loops cereal was a smart choice, and Hellmann's mayonnaise, a full-calorie mayonnaise, and things were smart choices according to them. So I got in touch with the Attorney General, and I said, this looks to me like the sort of thing where consumers are being misled and deceived, and could we work on this? So he put his staff attorneys on it, called me back a few days later, and said, more or less, let's go get them. And so he then launched an investigation into Smart Choices. He knew where money was flowing, more or less because I knew from contacts in the field what had happened. And one of the things that had happened is that the food industry had given a big grant to a professional society called the American Society of Nutrition to administer the program. This is a highly respected society, publishes very good journals, holds good meetings and things like that. And this was a bonanza for the professional society, getting all this money from the food industry. But then the food industry had this professional society front for them, so it wouldn't be clear to consumers that this was just an industry self-serving program. And so after several steps, about 6 weeks after the Connecticut AG launched this program, this investigation, the New York Times wrote several critical articles. The Food and Drug, the FDA administrator came out with a critical phone call about Smart Choices, and the industry pulled the program. And there were a lot of things going on at that time, but I think the key step was the investigation launched by the Connecticut Attorney General, especially when word got out that other AGs were likely to go together in collective action. So this was an example of a new party being enlisted into the public health approach to food-related issues. And to me, it was a great victory because it basically signaled the fact that somebody's watching, and somebody with clout is watching, and you can't deceive consumers anymore. Somebody will be after you. And so I'm wondering whether litigation or action by groups like the AGs could be an effective tool in some of these food issues we're talking about. And I think it's pretty easy to persuade them that food is as important as tobacco and its impact on public health and well-being and public costs and the like. And so the last point I'd like to make is I'm happy to see so many people at this meeting. It's heartening to know that Duke has a community of people care deeply about this. And I'd like to make an offer. We have submitted, several of us around the university have submitted a grant proposal for a developmental phase to create a World Food Policy Center here at Duke. And the idea is that there are big categories of food policy issues that were discussed today: hunger, food insecurity, obesity and overnutrition, environment and sustainability issues pertaining to agriculture, food safety and security. But just like there's splintering going on that I mentioned before, each of these issues is approached or dealt with by different government agencies, NGOs, experts, world agencies, and the like. And as a consequence, you get uncoordinated and disjointed world food policy that becomes a whack-a-mole game. You know, somebody creates a policy that whacks down a mole and appears to be a victory, but something else pops up in one of the other areas that sometimes has untoward consequences. So it's our idea that putting together a center that brings together experts and practitioners who deal with all of these issues will create better food policies that would apply at local, regional, state, and of course at global levels. So if any of you are interested in learning more about that or might like to be engaged, if we're lucky enough to get the grant funded to create this developmental phase, please get in touch and let me know. But there's been a lot of interest already, and I'm very pleased by that. So thank you again for inviting me. I learned an awful lot today. I thought the panels were terrific, speakers were terrific. And again, I'm very grateful that the legal profession is engaged in these food policy issues. I think it will take us a long way down the field toward the goal line. So thank you.